Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Delighted that you've managed to carve out some time to cover such a fantastic topic with us today. Super fortunate to be joined by such a fantastic panel for it. It is a panel format today. If you have any questions, please add them to the chat and we'll answer them as we go. Before I get to some introductions, a little bit of scene setting and some context for you. Today, we're talking about the underutilized secret weapon for reinforcing your CISO position. We're seeing across our network CISOs, unfortunately, becoming more and more stressed, constantly being sold at and not necessarily supported. So we're going to be talking about underutilized services that can support you meaningfully and strategically as well. Most executive roles, there's room for miscalculation, for making some mistakes. Often what they're dealing with is sort of longer term, somewhat known risk. But as we know, for a CISO, it can often be much more short term, very immediate, harder to articulate risk. And you end up, in many cases, going to work every day knowing you might end up on some level, rightly or wrongly, taking the blame largely for something that might be entirely outside of your control. Inevitably, that can lead to some pretty serious stress. So how can this be improved? What can be controlled? So many threats, so many unknown unknowns, so many tools, so many blinky boxes, and so much cognitive load. Where can we go for support to help model, reduce some of those risks, those unknowns, and contribute to a good relationship at the board level as well? And if the worst does happen, how to ensure the organization and individuals are appropriately characterized as the victims rather than being negligent. And that aspect of job security naturally feeds into those stress factors. So today, as I say, the focus is on how actually offensive services can provide this level of support and insight, specifically pen testing. That's going to be the focus today. So how pen tests can be a powerful and invaluable tool for CISOs, how pen tests can help demonstrate ROI, but sadly so often don't, and how they can be meaningful, demonstrable external validation of impact and progress, supporting the development of your defensive controls, not just helping play that vulnerability patch whack-a-mole that is so often the case, helping to lighten the cognitive load and not add to it. So that's a little bit of flavor. Now for some introductions. I'm Tom Gibbs, VP of Technology at Secure Impact. I run the technical practice here. I sit across all of our services. And whilst my background is technical, I'm joined by two of my colleagues who are far better equipped and qualified to talk in depth on this topic. So I'll be playing the role of moderator today. So firstly, I'm joined by Michael Pantridge. Michael is a seasoned senior security consultant. He runs a variety of engagements with us here at Secure Impact. He has a deep and varied background in cyber. He's a former military officer, instructor for Europol, worked with many major defense contractors, and has trained the militaries of other nations as well. Michael also teaches pen testing and malware analysis at the National College of Ireland. Michael has a huge amount of experience in this field and has come to this topic over the years from many different angles. Really looking forward to hearing what you have to say on this, Michael.
Thank you.
Also joined by Ben Shaw, as a security consultant specializing in offensive services and ethical hacking. Ben has experience partnering with a wide variety of organizations, runs many of our pen test engagements, has a particular passion and a very specific set of skills that make him formidable on a red and purple team engagement too. So Ben brings that from the trenches perspective on how offensive consultancy teams can and should be fantastic partners to CISOs. So welcome, Ben. Great to have you. All right, that's more than enough from me. Let's get into it. So we're not going to go into the ins and outs of what a pen test is, how it's different to a security assessment, anything like that today. For those interested in the nuance, we've published some blogs and articles on those topics. But thinking about how something like a pen test can support a CISO, let's start with some of the fundamentals. So how can they contribute to meaningful change? So Michael, over to you first.
I think they can, first of all, I think they can contribute to meaningful change because there's so much potential with the pen test, really to go beyond what is the baseline requirements, which in the minds of many people, it's just to fulfill a compliance requirement or a regulation. It's almost like, you know, a mechanic with doing an MOT test. And yes, he can go in and he can look at your engine and he can look around it, but he's really only there just to check that everything's in order. Whereas he could go, you know, a couple of steps beyond that whilst he's there. And I think a pen test is like that. There's so much potential, particularly whenever we're getting into a discussion on the very controls which network defenders put in place to try to frustrate red team or even real life enemy threats themselves.
Yeah, it's some really good points. I think what I'm hearing is pen tests, they can only have a limited value when they're dealing with that vulnerability patch whack-a-mole. If they don't feed into the bigger picture, it's just that near-term band-aid almost. Any thoughts on that, Ben?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really good question, Tom. Thank you. I think, you know, we've said this in the past, we'll say it again. I think for so many, pen testing has morphed into this sort of checkbox exercise. And what that does is it really undervalues what we see as one of the most important exercises in the cybersecurity industry. If you think of, you know, cybersecurity, the ecosystem as like a playing field, offensive security is really front and center of that. And, you know, things off the back of that are all about validation, things like trust and validating essentially truth of your systems, your processes, your people, and your assets at the end of the day as a business.
Yeah, I think so much of what a CISO and a defensive team does is kind of hypothetical. You know, you buy this tool, this blinky box, and it should do these things, and you can kind of mark your own homework internally and say, yeah, it's working, it should work, it will work. But unless you've got an amazing kind of threat intel team and you know, in a really established, mature position, it's all quite hypothetical, and it's only that outside perspective that says, yeah, it works, and we can't get in, we can't do the thing. So a test that really supports you is one that informs and contributes to improving controls and defenses, and then further to that, how it becomes communicable improvement, so it can be tied back to ROI as well, rather than just that point in time whack-a-mole thing that really only a technical team is going to appreciate. You know, something that the board is going to appreciate as well, and that inevitably adds to that credibility and helps reinforce the position. So yes, it's a point in time test, but it can be positioned and communicated in ways that lead to it being so much more. And I think a good partner in this space can help, whether that's through the findings, the remediation advice, you know, to start addressing those underlying weaknesses, and not just those surface vulnerabilities. I think ultimately, if it helps inform and gives the better picture of risk and helps move the needle on your posture, hopefully that starts to reduce some of those stress levels that we mentioned earlier on. Great. So for that to be even possible, a pen test presumably needs a pretty solid foundation. So Ben, any thoughts on where we go with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So much like building a house, it's all about foundations, I think. I think a pen test is as good as the scope that it's built on. Not all pen tests are made equally, for example, right? We see so many security consultancies kind of not skip, but fast forward one of the most important stages, which is at the start of every offensive engagement, is the scoping phase. And we don't mean scoping as in, you know, what website are we testing, or what network will we be, you know, sort of testing. We're actually asking questions about the asset. So, I mean, if you pay an assessment team to essentially gather information that you already have, it's neither efficient or so cost effective. So one of the best things you can do in scoping is, from my perspective, is to understand what we're testing first. Sometimes that can be as simple as just using the application itself, if it's a website, for example. So yeah, I think the scoping phase, I think most consultancies will brush over it as it's just something that has to happen for them to start the test. But I think it's far more important than what the industry is currently seeing it as. I think scoping is really the core of what makes a pen test successful, not just from the testers, sort of from the testing standpoint of how many vulnerabilities have I found, but also as a tester, it lets you understand that, well, I'm not just finding vulnerabilities, I'm actually applying them to what it means for this specific business. All right, so it's thinking outside the box, and a proper, well-established scope really helps enable that.
Yeah, and from a CISO's perspective, yeah, obviously you want to get value for money, but a good partner in this space can work with you to scope in a way that addresses the risks that are kind of keeping you up at night, basically, and potentially keeping the board up at night. And then surely they're channeling some of that kind of stress over to you. Yeah, and someone who works really closely with you to really uncover what your concerns are, and don't just take at face value and make broad assumptions, as you say, having it brushed over just so they can get on with it, get the boxes ticked and move on to the next engagement. Super important, I think. Michael, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely. Having a pen tester or a pen testing team who have a little bit of exposure, or have had a bit of exposure into the CISO's world before, rather than just being individuals who may be very dexterous in terms of being able to go and identify vulnerabilities, to have that little bit of extra contextual understanding of where they fit in the bigger picture, and what the work that they're going to be doing is going to be informing, namely the disposition of what the blue team is going to be prioritizing ultimately at the end of the day. So it really is truly having that sort of purple mindset is absolutely crucial to being a good pen tester, I believe.
Yeah, and if it's done well, it can support budget discussions rather than sort of almost hamper them. When you get that crucial executive summary, and we'll probably talk more about executive summaries and reports later, talking about all of the right areas in the right language, it's going to support you and hit all the right notes. And that can only happen if it's been scoped appropriate in the first case.
Absolutely.
Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think you mentioned the word earlier, Tom. I think it's all about partnership. And I think, I think that's probably going to be a running theme, I think, but it's absolutely crucial. It's absolutely paramount. I think, security teams with a limited sort of budget, maybe they're under pressure from, maybe past experiences with, cyber attacks, or maybe just, seeing what's happening, on the threat landscape. You have to be able to be malleable enough with a pen test for you to say, well, what's at the top of the risk register, for example? What are your crown jewels, right? What are you most worried about in your business? Because at the end of the day, they're all just business assets, whether it's a network, an application, a mobile application, whatever that looks like. Being able to sit down with proper consultants and say, well, here's something we are most worried about. Here's something that is maybe, maybe it's a new product, a new service. It's really at the top of the list of priority. And that doesn't really factor in things like the technologies. So we're not thinking about things like, oh, what's the oldest system we've got, or what's the most maybe vulnerable system we've got necessarily. It's all about, well, from the business point of view, what's most at risk? What's at the top of that all important risk register? And it's so often the case that doesn't happen. It's so often a mile wide, inch deep scenario where it's just it's just let's just test what we can necessarily, but really having that sniper rifle approach of let's make sure we test each security sort of technology stack individually, as opposed to just randomly shotgun spraying and hoping for the best. I think it's it's unfortunate, but that's the approach we're seeing in the industry now.
Yeah, no, really, really good point. So I guess in summary, on the scoping side, you have a limited budget. A partner should understand that. They should go out of their way to make sure it's scoped to address the things keeping you up at night, essentially the board up at night, like you say, the top of the risk register. Ultimately support those budget discussions, feed into that risk management process, give you that amazing executive summary that you can actually use and find helpful and supportive. And that can only be done if the scoping is spot on. Which is, I sense, easy to say, but possibly harder to do. So Ben, staying with you for a minute, what's needed to get this level of support, this sort of depth of insight?
Absolutely. Well, I think a lot of it relies on, as we've said, partnership, and a lot of that comes down to the individual sort of consultants who are getting their hands dirty and actually doing the work. I think it comes to meaningful, credible, external validation of your progress and not just something theoretical. I think with a pen test, you're not just testing like some tooling, you're not just testing products or services that you've bought as a business maybe. You're actually testing efforts from your team, whether that's a team of software developers, network engineers, or just broader security teams. Really, a penetration test is going to validate and find the truth of what the outcome of those efforts are, i.e. is the return on investment good? So from the standpoint of a CISO, you can see how that is extremely beneficial if it's done properly. I think a lot of this wraps around with executive summaries. I think we probably will sort of touch on that more shortly, I guess. But yeah, I think you need people who really care and have a vested interest in the work that they're doing. I think so many pen testers fall down the trap of, I guess you could call it sort of pen testing, sort of tunnel vision, where all you're focused on is what vulnerabilities can I find? What can I chain together? What exploits can I find? What can I hack? When in reality, most executives, most CISOs, for them to get real business outcomes from it is, again, you need to see the bigger picture. You need to see, well, how does this vulnerability actually affect my business? Because from our experience, again, we've said this in the past, we'll say it again, the highest impact we can have is when we can articulate something that is extremely technical, not just summarize that stuff, but also wrap it in here's what it means for the business, i.e. How long is it going to cost? How long will it take for you to fix it? And how much is that going to cost? Realistically, from an executive level or shareholder level, that's what the CISO needs to present. And those are the most important things. So, i.e. really strong foundations, really strong roots from the consultants themselves.
Yeah, and clearly we see or hear a lot of instances where that doesn't happen at all, which is a shame because money's been spent at that point and you just don't get that outcome. Michael, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of resonances there with what Ben had been talking about earlier in terms of the scoping. Just to permit me to take a step back, scoping really important because that return on investment is very much shaped by that. Because ultimately, as a CISO, you have a budget. You're going to be spending money on services or on people to carry this out, and therefore, if you get the right people in to do the job who understand that whole return on investment piece, they're more likely going to be far more efficient in their use of time. There is quite substantial potential for a pen test to burn budget if things are not set up properly, if the scope is off, if there has to be continuous clarification or permission given to do certain things. So really the efficiency of the pen test, that big picture knowledge, it feeds into the return on investment because ultimately time is money, and that is really something which should never be underplayed, I think.
Absolutely. I think, yeah, Michael, that's exactly right. I think businesses have to choose their security vendor very carefully. I think skills certifications are absolutely important, and it also comes down to, as we were saying, things like having to articulate very, very technical things into executive language from the consultant themselves, because you need to make sure you get everything across, not just high level stuff. And of course, that's more important when you've got things like tight budgets or just external pressure. And yeah, I mean, one of the first things we'll do with a web application pen test, for example, it sounds silly, but one of the first things we'll do, in the scoping phase is we'll just use the application. So many testers skip that step entirely. And it's absolutely important because from our experience, the most impactful vulnerabilities aren't really, really super technical, client-side attack chains. They're actually higher level logical weaknesses, things like shopping carts, for example. I've seen countless vulnerabilities in shopping carts that, normal users might accidentally exploit themselves. And those are the weaknesses that maybe, end up in refunding, massive amounts of of money, things like gift cards, all those things that actually directly translate into an organization losing money are far more impactful than if someone says, oh, well, here's a really technical client-side attack. I think there's a balance of the two, and you need to assess the asset as well. Everyone says, oh, it's a test, it's a test, it is a test, but what you're doing is you're evaluating the asset and I guess the entire security stack as a whole. And that's what it's all about, really. So I think organizations have to be very careful with the vendor that they choose. And it all comes down to having that actionable advice with really, really good, meaningful reports at the end of the day.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, Ben, I think we at Secure Impact are really, we really focus on partnership and on having like that continual engagement with our customers, because we really value that corporate knowledge that you build up. I mean, yourself, you do one pen test, and then that means that you're the subject matter expert on their network. You've just become their subject matter expert. So that corporate knowledge should not go to waste. And that means going back to the return on investment piece. Who's the best person to conduct a pen test on a network? Well, it's the people that did it the last time around. So therefore, we very much focus on partnership. We very much focus on longevity, and very much focus on having that interactive and real collegiate approach to our customer base, building, maturing, progressing. It's almost like a continual support package, not just a single pen test.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important as well to have the consultants who genuinely care about it, and because it's a human process at the end of the day. We don't do automatic scanning. It's not done by a script or a robot. There's real humans sitting down assessing the assets, and I think that goes a long way. I think it's from the perspective of a tester, I don't just care about, oh, what can I find? It's what can I find and what does it mean? Because that's far more important, from my perspective, and of course the client's perspective as well.
And you'll know what it means because you've trodden the path before. So
absolutely.
So yeah, getting quality testers, I guess it's obvious, it's a given, but also crucial. I think from a CISO's perspective, well, from all of us perspectives, there's a horrible skills shortage in cyber. We're all acutely aware of this, particularly in this space amid sort of growing demand. But yeah, it keeps coming back to the idea of partnership and support. So tests and testers absolutely should be a net benefit to CISO, and certainly not cause headaches, which you hear about sometimes as well, that it all goes horribly wrong and it just ends up being another fire to put out caused by the team that's supposed to be supporting you. And those technical certs, those skills, accreditations, yeah, all well and good. But I'd argue that being an exceptional consultant or having access to exceptional consultants is just as important. Looking for friends and allies and that relationship, and not just technical experts, is invaluable. And that depth of partnership, as you say, Michael, also prompts that conversation about kind of rotating test providers, which is probably a whole side conversation for another time. The pros and cons of that. But as you say, there's a lot of value in having that knowledge, not having to set everything all up from scratch, not having a new test, even if it's the same company, a new tester that just didn't get the notes from last time and is approaching it all from fresh eyes. Yeah. So I think, as you both alluded to just now, so many providers and vendors out there, they are pushing for efficiency, air quotes, and often automation, and potentially lower prices. So on the face of it, from a CISO's perspective, maybe that is supportive. It does relieve a bit of budget pain in the near term, but perhaps it's not as straightforward as that. So Michael, what are your thoughts there?
About relieving budget pain, I do think that when you can link your pen test findings into your existing appreciation of what your control sets are, then I just see, again, in terms of potential. I think that pen testing itself is most effectively used whenever it is carried out within a context of understanding control sets of what your company is offering. And in some respects, one might refer to it as being like an arms race. And I know that we at Secure Impact are very big on purple teaming. So you do this, they do this, you do this, they do that, they do that. And it's that countermeasure versus countermeasure versus countermeasure. And that iterative approach of really sharpening your blade, so to speak, in terms of your defensive measures. I think pen testing has an absolutely key and critical role to play in that, because as we've talked about, if you lay the foundation of getting quality consultants in who are technically adept and they're able to employ the most up-to-date attack vectors, then there's huge potential to really eke out in those control sets, which are costing money to put in place, to really get the best from them, and also to identify, maybe some of these controls we actually don't need. So again, that arms the CISO with something else to go to the board with, to show and be demonstrative in terms of, well, look, I've managed to save this money in the budget, and here's why. And it was because of the pen test that enabled me to gain that insight.
Yeah, I was speaking to someone literally just the other day around this on the automation side as well. It was a SaaS vendor. It wasn't a CISO role, but a kind of an equivalent. And they'd only in the past gone for these basically vulnerability scans, selling themselves as being perhaps a lot more than that. You see a lot of that, just as good as a manual pen test, etc. Claiming to be more than they are. And I think that can be quite dangerous. And I think they're aware as well that it can give them that false sense of security. So if we're thinking about trying to find support to help you sleep at night, having these things that say it's all fine, we didn't find any problems with your headers and your SSL ciphers or whatever, it doesn't really give you anything, like it doesn't have that credibility and the depth that makes you think, yeah, I'm in a good place and I can show that I've done the good thing and got someone to validate that is true. So in a sense, it hadn't helped them at all. And they spend quite good money on this. You could get a quality pen test for similar money. But for whatever reason that they haven't done, so I'm obviously trying to talk them around at the moment. It didn't really address those unknowns or affect stress levels either for them or for people across the executive team that know that there are things. But yeah, sad really.
Yeah, and I think it's you mentioned stress levels there. When you said that phrase, I'm thinking stress testing, which is kind of what a pen test kind of does a little bit as well. It stress tests the network. Well, that's another question you could add. Does it really stress test the network? I mean, for a building, for example, if you're living in a floodplain, then absolutely you can go and if you can verify that, well, that building is structurally sound. Okay, great. Well, if it's structurally sound, but that's fine. But is structural soundness enough if you're in a floodplain? I don't think so. And the thing is, with the threat landscape that we see every day in the cybersecurity world, that changes every 6 months. Yes, some things do remain the same, and there are a constant thorn in the side of network defenders. But over the course of 6 to 12 months to 18 months, you'll see variations over that. And it's quite likely that one of those variations could potentially be the cause of a breach in a network. So the pen testers, that skill set that the pen testers bring, it's not just about being able to obtain root access on a box. It's really about being able to shape your understanding of what the threat landscape is out there today, and to then adequately apply it in a relevant way, because relevance is so important in this regard.
And Ben, any thoughts on how the more automated end of the spectrum can support a CISO?
Yeah, I think vulnerability scanning, I mean, it gets a lot of a bad rep, I think, in the pen testing space, rightly so for a lot of reasons, but it absolutely does have its purpose, and it does have a place. If you think of it like a spectrum, you'd have vulnerability scanning, vulnerability management, you'd have purple teaming, and then adversary emulation, and then full-on red teaming. I think pen testing sits right in the middle of it. So I think, things like asset registers, vulnerability scanning, those are the first steps into cybersecurity and really evaluating what your posture is like, whether that's a network or application or whatever stack is under test. And yeah, I think pen testing fits right in the middle of that because again, vulnerability scanning. I think we've said this in sort of past webinars, but you get so many false positives, but also so many false negatives, which is less spoken about. But amongst both of those, it's hard to find out what the source of truth is. And with pen testing being right in the middle, it absolutely hits that on the head because it really gives you that only true form of proactive validation. And as we said earlier, this isn't just about a product or some mechanism that, or something you've added into that asset that you want to test. It's also the efforts of the teams essentially supporting those. So yeah, I think vulnerability scanning does have its place, but from the perspective of a CISO, I think pen testing really hits it on the head of, look, this is an external sort of entity. These guys know what they're talking about. They're really certified, and they, here is essentially, we say things like the report is Bible, right? So like the report is the source of truth, and because that is, factual, it's what we found. And with a pen test, you're not going to get false negatives and you're not going to get false positives because, as I said, there's a human in the mix, right? We're not quite there yet. Maybe with things like AI, maybe, but not yet.
So I think we're agreed that it's the automation end is part of the solution. It's another tool in the toolbox for a CISO, but in our view, not a replacement for that good old manual hacking from humans with ingenuity and creativity. And really, there's only so much support as a CISO you're going to get, or peace of mind, from a low contact, highly automated service. It's a pinch of salt, as you say, you've got to take, and potentially a lot of noise that can be ejected from them that someone's got to deal with, and often that ends up on their plates as well. It's hard to find a partner in automation. Okay, so even if you've got a good team, a great team working for you, fantastic technical skills, solid scope, decent communication, it's those findings, the remediation, the advice, and how they're communicated. Ben, any thoughts on how that feeds into this sort of theme of being supportive?
Absolutely. Yes, I feel very strongly about this one. So as a pen tester, I've read an awful lot of reports from all over the world, from security consultancies, their normal pen test reports, and many findings from a technical standpoint are the same or very similar. But when we talk about the quality of a report, we don't mean is it well formatted, or have they got screenshots, have they got that is the fundamentals, that's the bare minimum. What we're talking about is whether the report is sort of coherent enough that it translates to the people who actually care about the outcome. So many pen testers, as I said, will get that sort of tunnel vision and will just go super technical, and really that blurs the line with a report from a mass vulnerability scanner. That can be 30 to 100 pages plus, and it's not of use to virtually anyone, right? If you hand a report of that size with all that sort of technical information, it essentially just looks like jargon, and that never really translates to what are the next steps? What's the roadmap from here, right? Where do I go from this exercise or from this test? So I think a quality report, primarily, I think at least 80% of it, or i.e. the most important part, is the executive summary. It always has been, and I don't think that's going to change. I think making sure that the technical people who are doing the testing can write coherently enough to really emphasize not just the findings, but what it means for the business, i.e. how long is it going to take, how much is it going to cost. Those are the two most important things. Whilst at the same time being able to provide the most amount of sort of technical findings and the amount of detail needed in remediation. One of the things the industry does time and time again is the impact when they're writing a finding. The impact stays the same virtually for every pen test report they write, and that is completely wrong. The impact is completely unique for whatever business you're testing. Whatever the vulnerability is, the impact will vary, and so many organizations get that wrong. So there's a balance of, you need to have the technical stuff done really, really well for the technical guys, but the executive stuff has to be absolutely spot on and absolutely perfect. The quality is paramount, and that always comes down to the quality of the consultants who are executing the penetration test.
Yeah, no, really good point. So quality, in a sense, is a given. It's the communication side and some of the softer, more almost political aspects that get missed so frequently.
Yeah,
Michael?
absolutely. I think one of the other things as well is in something like an executive summary, it's important, from the shoes of the CISO, it's important that a pen test shouldn't be seen as like a telling off. So many organizations still see that as I don't really want to have a report that shows like, high vulnerabilities or any criticals. I'll just stick with a vulnerability scanner that maybe won't log in and maybe won't actually find them. It shouldn't be seen like that at all, right? We want to help you, even, from the tester's shoes. The objective is to find as much as we can so we can help you long term, right? Make that cybersecurity roadmap for you. And a large part of that is actually when we're testing, when we are evaluating the assets, we actually mention the positive things as well. So many organizations leave that out. You have to say what the application responded well to, because that absolutely, again, it all roots back to that source of truth. What did the application, maybe it was really strong at, so client-side attacks, for example, things like cross-site scripting. Maybe it did a fantastic job of, blocking those. That's not nothing, right? Any security team should know about that, because they have to know what investments they're making are working. And, from the end of that exercise, then they can work out, well, here are the areas we should maybe spend a little, slightly more time in. And here are the areas here's essentially proof that we're all golden in. So it's absolutely important for you to mention those things as well. The good stuff.
Yeah, really good points. Michael, anything to add to that?
Yeah, great points made about the about including stuff that you maybe don't think is that interesting. Doing a pen test, you should always include the stuff that, well, I tried this, it didn't work. That's, as Ben says, that's knowledge. I tried this, it didn't work. I tried this, it didn't work. I tried this, it didn't work. That's valuable. That's absolutely golden. And also just reiterate the points about the exec summary. That's your elevator pitch. And really what you want to leave the person with a feeling that these people are good and they've told me something that's caught my attention. That's your chance. Your chance to shine is on those first couple of pages of the report, and to really leave an impression. And I think a little bit of, having somebody else on your team who can look through your exec summary and see, well, did that really impact me whenever I read that? Or am I looking at something that just seems to be a regurgitation of a Nessus report? CISOs can tell the difference. And they'll know the difference between the two things. So and also with the exec summary, it's also kind of an opportunity that you have to maybe, and I'm not saying about to layer in stuff, but sprinkle in a little bit of what makes your pen test different from what somebody else does. So example of that might be, what, for this one we actually use a little bit of OSINT and we found this. Mind you, I'm just saying a sprinkling, not a not a 3-course meal.
Yeah, I think from a CISO's point of view, like, the worst case is you've had an engagement that was a headache. You've been chasing, it's been disruptive, and then you fear that you're going to get a damning negative report with sort of pedantic, sort of almost irrelevant findings, and it's just like, if that's been your experience, then you probably dread the next pen test. Rather than it being the support, this brilliant, this is someone trying to help me, that wants to help me win, that's going to give me something that backs up my position, reinforces my position, I can show to other people, that helps facilitate those discussions. Even if the findings are largely the same, how it's presented, how it's communicated, how it's wrapped up can be the difference between those two. So yeah, and often isn't the focus, because as you say, Ben, everyone gets tunnel vision. It's all about the hacking and the technical piece. Yeah, seems like a miss. So some key themes I think that have come out there. So one, quality, but that's kind of a given. Everyone presumably feels similarly about that. But I guess it's sort of empathy and back to that idea of partnership as well, and giving you something that genuinely supports and reinforces, and not just another technical document. Something that has the so what, the what it all means at the end, rather than just all the pieces of the puzzle. How are we doing on time? Not too bad. So you mentioned OSINT there, and I guess sort of a lead into perhaps sort of the threat intel side of the world, Michael. Anything you want to add to that as it relates to pen tests and to kind of building that credibility and that support from a CISO's perspective?
Well, I think it's a much misunderstood area, and I think that it's not going to be the silver bullet, and never really, in my experience, it's never been the silver bullet. But what it does is it adds like a rich understanding of background, and it's there and it's open, and it's, you'd be foolish not to try and leverage it to the best of your ability. I appreciate there may be time constraints, and you can't, as I've heard you say before, Tom, you can't boil the ocean with it. You've only got so much time. However, being armed with the context that it provides will have a knock-on effect, like a row of dominoes, into the quality of your report. I think it can be a time saver, and as I said before, it can maybe add a little bit extra, like a garnish on top of the meal that wasn't there already. So the other thing I would say is that is also changing all the time, but it's actually realistic, because guess what the hacker's going to do? He's going to be doing exactly the same thing. He's going to be performing his OSINT on your network as well. So I can't understand why you wouldn't do it. You're replicating what would happen in real life.
Yeah, absolutely. I think without delving into much of the differences with a vulnerability scan and a pen test, I know we've done that in the past, but yeah, sometimes it can be night and day difference. I think, if you're thinking, this is just an example, but if you're thinking about exposed logging, things like login portals for password spraying, right? With a vulnerability scanner, or even a pen test that hasn't been scoped properly, right? Someone who's just said, here's a list of IPs, scan them, throw what you can at them, get the report done on Friday, right? That's really bad consultancy, but it does happen. That's what we're seeing in the industry. It can be, if the tester says, okay, well, I'm familiar with what these hosts are, I'm familiar with what this asset is for the business, like what it does, what it's for, who's going to use it. They only have to do that small step of maybe it's searching on the dark web using services like sort of dehashed, for example, trying to find some breach creds from a few years ago. Spraying those, my experience, you do get successful with them. And then there's a night and day difference, because in one scenario, there's no compromise, no risk, maybe a few low vulnerabilities. In the other, there's an absolutely critical emergency, because now there are plain text creds on the internet that someone can use to actually breach your systems and get some data from there. There's night and day difference. And the only change is a little bit of sort of critical thinking from the tester, where they say, hey, you know what? I'm going to just spend a little bit of time, as Michael said, just a small bit of a sprinkling of the OSINT stuff, and it can go a really long way. So yeah, sometimes it could be like chalk and cheese difference.
Yeah, I mean,
I guess
if you can enumerate an entire organization's email address space from their LinkedIn, well, why wouldn't you do that?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
So I think, it sounds like it helps build that credibility, and then by having a credible methodology, it helps build trust from the CISO's perspective that a thorough job has been done, and that their picture of risk is meaningful, and not having that kind of false sense of security, which can either add to stress levels or cause problems in other areas. So yeah, I think a good point to add there. I realize we're coming to the end of time. If you have any questions, as I say, just please enter them to the chat box, and we'll try and get to them. If we can't during the session, we'll try and do it by email afterwards. Okay, so before we wrap up, appreciate there's a little bit of an elephant in the room. We've been talking about pen tests. We've skipped past the question, and I know we've covered it in other sessions about kind of when you are ready for one. So we're not going to go through the technical, like how you might know, but just thinking about that reinforcement of positions and what we've seen in the industry and across our network. Obviously, don't use pen tests as expensive vulnerability scanners, not just because that's not a great thing to do, but that can end up undermining some of those discussions, particularly around sort of budget. If it just doesn't look like a good use of money, ultimately it can cause you headaches. Equally, don't use scanning when pen testing is what you really need. So we covered that a little bit earlier. But even worse, don't skip all the way to red team when you skip past scans and pen tests. And we've seen that in a couple of cases go badly wrong. There's been a lot of fallout, been a bit of a bloodbath. I've never quite understood what the thinking was for the people that went that route, but they weren't with those companies for very long. So yeah, maybe just there's a maturity curve there, and yeah, just making sure that you're picking the appropriate offensive tool that matches the roadmap. Otherwise, yeah, it's going to be only adding to the problem and the stress levels, not alleviating them. Brilliant. Okay, so to wrap up, yeah, thoroughly enjoyed the discussion. I think if we can come away with just one or two highlights, if I can come to each of you, if I may, just for one thing that from what we've discussed, if nothing else, people take away from this. Michael, what would it be for you?
Partnership and maturity understanding of an organization, not to just merely go into a pen test with a view to ticking a box, but rather to have a more holistic and forward-looking point of view where this pen test is part of a roadmap. This pen test is part of my client's roadmap. And, we're not going to solve all the problems immediately, but over time, we're very well placed to bring to bear the findings of this pen test report in conjunction with contextual knowledge that we can build up and with big picture purple team type thinking.
Brilliant. I think you might have lost Michael there. Ben, how about for you?
Very good timing. No worries. Yes, I think for me is probably high quality reporting, and that, as I said, is very, very reliant on high quality testers, making sure they know what they're doing, same tester each time, and making sure they are really getting those findings across to the people who they will impact the most, right? So executives, shareholders, that executives, CISO and up level really is absolutely, very, very important. And yeah, I think main takeaway is there should definitely be a focus on a high quality report, whatever that looks like, whether it's a fancy product, whether it's a web application, whatever that is. At the end of the day, it's the executive summaries that have the most impact, and you need to nail those on the head. You need to get them done very well.
Nice. And I think for me, it's very similar to Michael's, actually. It's partnership. There's someone who is that friend, that ally, makes the process effortless, enjoyable, delightful, even, that really cares, that has that empathy, wants you to win, and will support you to make sure that you do. You're likely all getting pen tests already. Worth pausing, I guess, to think if that describes what you are getting now, if they really are serving the purpose that they should be, if they are that informative, supportive tool for kind of meaningful change. Obviously, if you need help, the team at Secure Impact here, we help organizations of all shapes and sizes work out where they are in their maturity journeys, and we offer many of the services that we've talked about today. So please reach out. We're here to help. All right, well, thank you very much, Ben, Michael. Thank you everyone for joining, and yeah, hope to see you at another event like this soon. All right, take care, everyone.
Thanks, Tom.
Thanks, Tom.